Hi there. Today's episode is an encore episode. I thank you once again for tuning in and listening with an open heart. And I hope that you will find, if you have listened to this episode previously, that you will find some additional new nuggets that you may have missed the first time you listened to it. And if this is your first time to hear this particular episode, again, I hope that you find a thing or two or three within the episode that might spark some additional curiosity and a willingness to see things from a different perspective. So, on with today's encore episode. Hi there. You're listening to episode number 2 of the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thanks for checking us out. And if you are a returning listener, thanks for tuning back in. We're so glad you're here. Please consider subscribing to the podcast so that you'll know when a new episode drops. I can let you know that in the future there will be additional short mini episodes that will drop sporadically and not on Sundays. And so by subscribing to the podcast, you'll be in the know when those mini episodes drop. For now, I invite you to settle in with a cup of coffee or tea and an open heart and tune in and listen to my estrangement story. Before we begin, I want to quickly review our disclaimers. I record these podcast episodes in my home, which is in the city, and I share it with dogs. This means you're apt to hear background noise as evidence of life being lived. Number 2, we embrace messy here. That means things like ums and a curse word or two and prolonged silences and a stumbling over words are likely to happen. And I'm not apt to edit those out. I think it's important for the world at large to see us as we are, and that is imperfect human beings. And number 3, I am not a therapist or a counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support, such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. At the start of each episode, I like to begin with a quote. Today, I have 2. The first one. The universe nestles strange jewels within us all, and then stands back to see if we can find them. Elizabeth Gilbert. The second one. Every painful relationship is a wake-up call to your authentic truth, to your inner alliance, to your greater alignment. Basically, it's here to wake you up to you. Dr. Shefali Tisbury. This episode will be about my own estrangement story. I contemplated discussing both my estrangement and my reconciliation in one episode. However, I felt that they both required significant details and explanations, and I felt it would just be entirely way too long for one episode. So I've split them up. So this episode will be about my estrangement journey, and in episode number 3, we'll cover my reconciliation journey. There are 2 caveats to today's episode and my estrangement story. The first one is, this is my story. It's not yours. There will be parts that you will not recognize, will not be able to relate to, etc. However, it doesn't mean that what I experienced is wrong or any worse than or less worse than yours. It is simply mine. Number 2 is I respect my adult children, and they are the owners of their stories. As such, there will be parts of my story that intertwines with theirs that I will not disclose or talk about as I explain my estrangement story. If and when they elect to give me permission to share their stories, I will do so. Until then, they're not mine to tell, and I will not. Okay, so let's get on with my estrangement story. I wanted to begin with a little bit of background information because I feel that it's a part of my story because it's in large part these things played a big role in why the estrangement happened in the first place. So I wanted to kind of delve into a little bit of that. The first thing is my own childhood. I came from a family of 4, a mom, dad, and myself, and a younger sister. And my parents divorced when I was 5. My sister and I went and lived with my mom, and my dad saw us on the weekends. And right after their divorce, it wasn't long after that my father was absent from my life for about 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years. And that I now know after therapy and delving into my own baggage, so to speak, that caused significant abandonment issues for me. So that was a piece of my life moving forward. The second thing is I experienced a bit of domestic violence in my life. One of those experiences was at the hands of a stepmother. It was physical and mental abuse, and I was a young child with the emotional abuse part, but the physical piece happened about a year before I became a mom. And then the second part of that domestic violence was my first husband was physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually abusive to me. So, and he was the father of my first daughter. I did divorce him not long after she was born, and but that colored my world in a lot of ways. So I think it's important to understand that. And then the third thing is the way that I parented. I was a very young mother. I became a mother at the age of 18. And then my second daughter was born when I was 25. So I was super young. And it wasn't until just, I don't know, within the last decade or so that I fully accepted the fact that I was, in essence, a teen mom. I mean, I was quite mature for my age, but I was still young. I mean, 18's super young. So for a bit of time, it was just the 3 of us. You know, for a long time, for 7 years, it was just myself and my oldest daughter. And then when I had my second daughter, you know, it was just the 3 of us for a bit of time. And so that also colored the way that I parented. I was a single mom, and I had zero help or support in all ways from their fathers. So I will tell you that my ex-husband and my first daughter's father was never in the picture. He was never there. So there was no support there. My second daughter, her father was there for a bit of time. He kind of floated in and out of our lives, but there was no support for me as a parent regarding him. And then the other big piece that affected how I parented my children was that I worked, for the most part of their childhood years, I worked in public safety. I was a 911 operator and a police, fire, and EMS dispatcher. and I was a police officer. So that world also colored how I parented. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the background. So what I'm entitling this episode is the fracture, and that fracture, with the relationship with my daughters, it had a lot of mini fractures before the big fracture. There were lots of red flags that I did not see as a red flag, didn't recognize it as a red flag. I just thought that those were challenges of the relationship that I had with my daughters. And just part of being a parent. I did not see that in their totality that it was inching us closer and closer to estrangement. So my estrangement experience, I like to say, started with like the perfect storm about 6 months before the estrangement actually happened. And within those 6 months, I went through a lot of different big, heavy things in my life. One of those was I partnered with someone and ended up having a subsequent separation, and they, a month after our separation, found out they had cancer. And so I was dealing with a lot of emotional issues and challenges at that point in time, dealing with that. I was also dealing with a job that was extremely stressful. I was in management and was dealing with a lot of ethical issues at work that seemingly was not a concern for anyone other than myself. And so I was really struggling at work. I was struggling in my romantic relationship. And I was also, on top of all of that, my oldest daughter was pregnant with my grandson. And there was a bit of time that she was hospitalized during the pregnancy when we thought that he may come early. And so there was stress involved with that. And as a side note to that, not only was she my daughter who was pregnant, I come from a background of pregnancy and birth. And so I have a little deeper knowledge of the complications and things that could potentially go wrong. And so I was really, really worried about that in the midst of all of that. So I had all of that happening 6 months prior to the estrangement. And as I'm dealing with those things, I'm super emotional, and anytime I'm around my daughters, there are tears, I'm crying, I'm easily brought to tears and things like that through, not with intention, but just because of my emotional state at that point in time. And I will also say that I got myself back into therapy about 4 months pre-estrangement as well, because of all the emotional things that I was dealing with in my personal life. I was back in therapy for that. So the estrangement occurred in January of 2016. And I remember the day that I think triggered the actual estrangement. And I say I think because my daughters and I have not had a conversation about what prompted the estrangement. I've not heard directly from them about that. And so this is my piecing of pieces together for a timeline. And so I remember it was a Saturday, and I was again, just in that emotional state. I was by myself. My partner had moved out of our home, and we had just gotten through the holidays, and I was just seeking solace. So I got on a ferry and went over to a island across from where I lived, and to just take a drive and try to get my head cleared. And I was over there without cell reception for a couple of hours. And I remember getting back on the ferry to come back home, and I got a phone call from my daughter, my oldest daughter. And actually it was a message, a voicemail that she had left while I was out of cell reception. And basically the voicemail she left was asking me to seek inpatient treatment for my emotional state. And I remember thinking we had never had a conversation about that. There had been conversations in general about, wow, Mom, you're so emotional, what's going on with you, that kind of thing, but never, at least from my perspective, not anything that indicated they were super, super concerned about me, and thought that I needed to be hospitalized because of my emotional state. And so I was really taken aback by that voicemail. And and again, from my police background, I know what involuntary commitment is, and I know how family members can involuntarily commit a family member under certain circumstances. And I also knew from years of therapy when I was younger what that also could entail from that perspective. And I was just mortified. I thought, my first initial reaction was, how dare she think that I'm so mentally unstable that I need to be hospitalized? And so I went home and contemplated on that, sat with that, and I didn't respond to her email. I just could not believe that was the option that was being presented to me by someone who was stating they cared about me and they were concerned. So I did not respond, and within about a week or so, I was completely cut off. I was unfriended on Facebook. I was blocked on Facebook, where I could not see anything of any kind that they had posted. I reached out and tried to call, and my calls went to voicemail, and they were never returned. Text messages were not answered, responded to, and it took me about a week to realize what was actually happening. And even at that point in time, I didn't understand that was estrangement. I was just in such a state of shock because I had always been in contact with my girls, and not because I was never a mother who was, in their business and talking to them multiple times every day, and I was not that over-meddling type of mom, but I was a controlling mom. And so it was very foreign to me to not be able to have contact with them on some level. And so I was completely shocked. I remember thinking, why are they not answering me? What in the world has happened? And eventually I got to the place where I realized what was happening. And from there, it seemed like a spiral. From there, also as a side note, shortly thereafter, mid-January, I ended up ending my very stressful management position and cut my income was cut by almost half. And so I ended up having to move from the home that I dearly loved, the town that I was absolutely in love with, and had to relocate someplace I did not want to go, because I could no longer afford my home. And in the midst of that, I did not tell my children where I was going, because I couldn't tell them, because they were not answering phone calls or text messages and things like that. So here I am. I find myself in the middle of this estrangement experience, and the physical and psychological effects were absolutely profound. And I want to kind of go through some of those, because I think it's important, number one, for currently estranged parents to understand that what you're experiencing is completely normal when you have been alienated from your children, estranged from your children. Alienation is a bit different. So I went through grief, in all its stages, for a long time. And I think on some level, I'm still going through that, albeit not nearly as intense and that type of thing. But I think on some level, I'm still experiencing a bit of grief and loss. Dr. Joshua Coleman is a psychologist, and he talks about in his practice, which is he specializes in estrangement. To quote him, "In my practice, I've seen that it is not only distressing to be deprived of receiving comfort, but similarly to be deprived of the ability to provide comfort." And that was, I was not getting any sort of comfort from my children, which I had been used to. And I think that most parents on some level, you expect that, and you have received that on some level. And, people, I didn't tell people about my situation. And a large part of that I now know was shame. Didn't know that at the time, but it was. So I went through the grief, in all of those stages, of which anger is one, and guilt, and the pleading and the begging, and I'll do whatever you need me to do, want me to do, whatever, and all of that was met with either silence or absolute resistance. There were a few email exchanges between myself and my children, and they were not pleasant at all in the beginning. I also went through significant shame, especially as a mom. If your own kids won't love and care about you, then who will? And if your own kids disown you, what kind of a human being are you? That I replayed that over and over and over in my head all day long, every day, for months. I thought that there was something inherently wrong with me as a person, and that's what shame does. That I was not worth anything if my children did not love me. I felt anger. I was so angry at them, and that oscillated between being so angry at them and wanting to just scream at them, to just wanting to get on my knees and beg for their forgiveness for whatever it was that I had done. It was just back and forth between from one extreme to the other. And I was also angry at friends who were leaving me, right? Who were not checking in on me, who couldn't handle my intense grief, could not handle my anger, could not handle my sadness, could not handle my tears. And so they just went away. I lost all of my friends. All of them exited my life. There was no one there who called to check on me. There was no one there who was concerned if I got up in the morning. there was no one. None of my friends were there, and I was super angry at them. I was also very angry with my daughter's in-laws and their families, because I was like, how, if I were in their shoes, I would be demanding that these, my son-in-law or daughter-in-law would, contact their parent. I couldn't understand how they were okay with this. And that, again, was my perspective, right? I had no idea of really knowing what they were saying to my daughters, if anything. I had no confirmation of that. I also felt guilt. I went through all the coulda, woulda, shouldas, through their childhood years, and I beat myself up. There was no need for anyone else to beat me up, because I was quite good at that myself. And this brings up, this still is a thing for me today that I still grapple with, is guilt over how I parented my children. I replayed a constant loop of where did I go wrong? What did I do? How could I do it differently? How could I make up for the past? And I couldn't. And not being able to fix something was foreign to me. I had always been an in control kind of person, in charge, fixing, correcting, making things work. My careers as a 911 operator, in police and fire dispatcher, and as a police officer, I was always in control, and I was always able to either fix it myself or get somebody there to fix it. And this was a situation that no one could fix. No one. So the guilt ate me up. And again, on some level, I'm still dealing with that today. Also, some of the physical things I went through, I had significant cognitive issues. Simple daily tasks were difficult for me. Concentration level, things like writing a grocery list, remembering to take the grocery list with me, because I'm a pen and paper kind of gal. And so I would lose things, would not remember where I put them. At work, people would, ask me to do things and I would forget them. And that's just was so out of character for me. I had a good bit of memory loss. Things like, people's birthdays or special occasions were missed. Forgetting, to pack things to go to work. And again, things just were not, that's just not how I typically operated. So I also had insomnia. Solid, restful sleep was impossible. I had dreams. I had nightmares. There were many nights I was up at, I'd go to bed at 10:30, and I'd wake up and be up at 2 o'clock in the morning and up for the rest of the day. It just wreaked havoc on my ability to get any sort of rest. And sleep is a magic pill. It can cure a lot of what ails you, and I was not getting good sleep. Also, I had an inability to stabilize my emotions. I went from profound sadness to anger, loud outburst. I was either sobbing and wailing and crying, or angry and screaming. I was unable to tolerate minor little concerns and issues and things at work. I made mountains out of molehills and that kind of thing. I remember being at the grocery store one day, and I can still remember where I was actually standing in the grocery store. It was in between the frozen food section and the meat section. And I just stopped in the middle of the aisle, and people were walking around me and towards me and behind me. And I remember it was almost like an out-of-body experience. I just was like, how could these people be going on with their lives when my kids won't talk to me. And I started sobbing in the middle of the grocery store. And not one soul stopped to inquire if I was okay. And I got myself together, pushed my cart to the front of the store to check out because I could no longer shop. I couldn't remember what I was there for, what I needed. And I remember getting to the checkout line, and this woman was in front of me with her grandson. And he was sitting in the seat of the cart, and she was bent down talking to him, and they were having conversations. He must have been, I don't know, about 2, I guess. And she was, just very loving with him, and he would take and hold her face, and he'd kiss her, and I just started sobbing again, because I didn't have that in my life. I was not permitted to see my grandchildren throughout that estrangement experience, and so my emotions were just all over the map. I just couldn't get it together. So, then there was also just the withdrawal from society. I mean, again, I had said earlier, my friends all left, so there was no social engagement. There was no way for me to, quote unquote, get out of my world, and I couldn't get out of my world because anytime I stepped out of my house, I was looking at other people enjoying life, enjoying their families, enjoying their children, enjoying their grandchildren. And I had none of that. And I couldn't, it was too painful for me. I could not do it. So there set in social isolation. And I just withdrew and didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything. I went to work and I came home. And that was the extent of my, quote unquote, any sort of life. And I venture to say even today that really wasn't a life that I was living. I was existing. So as I mentioned earlier, I had been in therapy and was trying to work on, when I started therapy, was trying to work on my relationship, my romantic relationship, and when that ended, and then the estrangement occurred, I switched the therapy into focusing more on the estrangement piece. And I remember walking in one day for therapy, and when the estrangement happened, and I told my therapist, and I said, my daughter thinks I should be committed because I'm not emotionally sound right now, and she thinks I'm severely depressed and that I need to be on medication. And my therapist, I'll never forget her look on her face, and she said in the most compassionate tone, she said, "You're not depressed, Kreed. You're doing this thing called life, and you're feeling all the feels." And I think that in that moment is when I felt like maybe I could be experiencing life again one day. So therapy was a space for me to process the wild and varied emotions I had. There for a bit of time, I was going to therapy twice a week. And for the first 3 years after the estrangement occurred, I went to therapy weekly. So it was in therapy that I was held with compassion and empathy. It was there that I was able to and permitted to explore all of my emotions without having a single one of them judged. If I was crying, I was crying. If I was pissed off, I was pissed off, and all of it was welcomed. There was at no point in time was I told I shouldn't be feeling this, or it was wrong to feel that, or I should be, thinking about this and being more positive over here. None of that happened. Whatever I was feeling was permitted. It was there that my feelings were validated and my emotions were validated. It's where my worth and value as a person and as a parent was mirrored back to me, and that's something that a lot of estranged parents don't get. So for that, therapy was extremely valuable. And it was there that I also learned about the little t traumas and the effects of such. From my own childhood, the abandonment and non-validation of my emotions played a huge role. I learned about the domestic violence and the traumas that caused. And I also learned about the traumas my daughters experienced. And again, in their lives, that's not my story to tell. Those are not my stories to tell, so I won't. But they both experienced traumas in their life. And it was there where I learned about attachment needs and styles. And it was there that I also learned that I had codependent and enmeshed relationships with my daughters that I was never aware of. I thought I just loved them. And it was, while I did love them, it was not a healthy relationship. So therapy was my saving grace. And, it was hard work to get through all of that. But I don't know where I would be today had it not been for therapy and finding the therapist that I have. And for those, I'd get this question on occasion. Some people want to know, how did I find my therapist? How did I know she was a good therapist? And like I said, I started seeing her before the estrangement occurred. So, I didn't seek her out specifically for estrangement. However, she did have experience with estrangement and was able to talk to me about that. She's also a Jungian therapist, Carl Jung, and comes at therapy from that perspective. She also is an IFS therapist, which is internal family systems. And so her perspective is something that I value immensely. And it was extremely helpful for me. Not to say that it's going to be helpful for everyone out there, but that's what helped me. So I'd like to kind of wrap this up a little bit. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Feel free to email those to me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer those on air as well if you have specific questions. In closing, I want to say that my estrangement experience allows me to have immense empathy for estranged parents. I understand your pain. I get it. I know what that feels like. And I know. I will say that today I hold zero resentment towards my daughters regarding the estrangement. In fact, because of this experience, I think I love them more today than I did pre-estrangement. And when I say love them more, perhaps maybe what I mean is I love them in a healthy way that feels so much better today than it did pre-estrangement. And I know that my estrangement experience taught me how to love more openly and deeply than I ever did before. And that was because I allowed myself to be open to the healing process and did not stay stuck in all the swirl of the estrangement emotional storm. Also, I am working on a book, a memoir regarding my estrangement experience, and the title of that book is I Taught Her Well. And I'm hoping that will come out in 2022, late 2022. So this brings episode number 2 to a close. The continuation regarding the reconciliation with my daughters will be on episode number 3. And I hope that our time together was something that you feel was well spent. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know. If you are an estranged parent or estranged adult child and would like to share your story on the podcast, please reach out via email to me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com or by leaving a voice message on the podcast at ENCORE.fm. If you prefer to share your story with me and have me share your story on the podcast, that's also an option. You can either be a guest on the show, or if you would like to remain anonymous, but you want your story told, I'm happy to either meet with you via Zoom or to have you email me your story, and I'm happy to share that on the podcast. Again, thank you for your time today, and know that this was really hard for me today. It's the first time that I've publicly talked about as many details as I have, and I appreciate you listening in and taking in my story. Thank you. Until next time.